told my friends what I'm about to tell you, and they urged me to share it here. It happened back in December, about a week before Christmas. I'm a 32-year-old guy, currently using my GI Bill to go to college in a city in one of the mountain time zone states. I'm so busy with school and work, so I don't have time to go out and socialize often. So I have to rely on a lot of the apps to go on dates. I matched with this really cute girl around my age, and we had a good conversation, and then we scheduled a date. It was at a bar restaurant, not far for either of us to drive, so it was easy. She was very pretty in person, and we got along great. During our conversation, I found out that she worked in a non-cop role at the police station, like a receptionist essentially. I also learned she had a roommate, whom she said was out of town for the holidays. She added that she hated being alone because she had a crazy ex-boyfriend who stalked her. I was a little uneasy at that, and I told her as much. And she said he's harmless, so I kinda let it go. We had a few more drinks, and we were there for about another hour, and at her suggestion, she said that we should go back to her place. We went to her house, and she walked up and just opened the door. She didn't unlock it. It was already open, which I found very odd because she said she had a stalker, that her roommate was gone. She started feeding her cat, and as she was doing that, I saw a bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter. I touched it, and it was still cold, like it hadn't been there for a while. The cereal wasn't soggy either. I asked her whose it was, and she hesitated and said she ate it as a snack before heading to the bar. But it just didn't make sense. Before I could say anything, she just kissed me and put her arms around me seductively and said for me to take her to her room. We started fooling around, and I went to close the curtains, and she told me to leave them open. A few minutes later, maybe 5, we were in bed and my back was to the window, and she let out a huge gasp. A scared gasp. Her eyes were out the window. I turned around and saw someone in a hoodie, and they took off. I heard the steps running on her back deck. I immediately jumped up and ran out to make sure her doors were locked, and of course the front door wasn't. I ran to it and locked it, and right when I did, the door started banging. I went to open it because I was gonna fuck the dude up, or at least try to, and she told me to just go back to bed with her. I screamed at her and asked if she was insane. She told me he does this and goes away, and I asked her, "You know this is your ex?" And she said yeah, and to not worry about it. At this point, he started banging on the side of the house on the other end, and she didn't seem at all scared. Kept trying to get me to go back to her bed. I didn't want to call the cops because for all I know, this dude was a cop, or she'd know the cops that showed up who would take her side. I also couldn't just leave because my car was at the bar, and I was terrified. At this point, I started calling her out for the door not being locked, the cereal, and I openly called her a liar. She couldn't come up with any logical answers, and I had no idea what I was into. I shouldn't have done this, but my fight or flight was pretty much kicked in, and I told her, if this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I promise I'll kill you both. I'm not a hard ass or anything, but my fear told me to let her know that no matter what it was, they'd have a fight on their hands. My thoughts of what were going to happen to me were all over the place. I ordered an Uber off my phone and didn't tell her. I just kept arguing with her and asking her what was going on, hoping to just keep her talking and in the room. I stayed right next to the door so I could leave ASAP. Luckily, I never got my pants off and my jacket and shoes were right by the door, so I was able to get dressed. The Uber showed up, and without saying anything, I just opened the door and ran out there as fast as I could. I looked back at the door, and she was just standing there. It's only been a little over a month, but I honestly have no idea what the fuck I got into. I don't believe the story of just a girl with a crazy ex based off of the factors I told you. It feels like either a robbery or some weird fetishized cuck thing. I don't know. Definitely something I'm very mad at myself for. I mean, I'm a 9-year Navy vet, and allowed myself to get into a situation like that. I reported her account on the Uber ride back to the bar. And I told the bartender as well about what happened, just in case they saw her in there ever again. If I remember correctly, this happened in January or February 2024. I was visiting family in southern France, and I didn't want to stay at their place, even if they offered, for personal reasons that I won't share here. Note that I visit them quite often, and usually last minute, so I would never book the same place. And I would sometimes book a hotel room, which was more expensive but better for me, as I don't necessarily want to socialize with the hosts. Even when I would book Airbnbs, I would always search for flats or studio flats, and not a room in the flat/house where other people live, as I want to be on my own, so this is an important criterion for me. So I booked this Airbnb within walking distance to where my family members stay, and it looks very nice on paper. I think it was marketed as a house or ground floor flat, with access to a yard and a garden. It was probably one of those cheaper options. I don't remember for sure, but I wasn't going there for leisure or planning to have a very nice place for myself, to have enjoyable holidays, if that makes sense, so I really wanted something for convenience and wouldn't pay extra for any kind of luxury. There were not a lot of reviews, but the few ones were pretty positive. So I go to that place with my suitcase, waiting in front of the house. I contact the landlord, who should give me the keys, but he's late. I spent at least 1 hour waiting outside, and I'm trying to be patient, realizing at least the neighborhood is pretty nice and seems safe, even if I need to walk through areas that are slightly dodgy to get there from where my relatives stay. The landlord finally arrives. He seems like a fairly good man and apologizes profusely, saying he was in another town visiting his cousin or friends, and time flew by. First red flag. He says they were drinking and didn't have time to sober up, so he had to speed on the highway on his motorbike while being tipsy or drunk. He stops and asks me half-jokingly not to say that in my review. I get a bit serious and tell him he shouldn't be drinking and driving, but he says he really didn't want to make me wait further. I tell him I won't flag that in my review. Spoiler alert, I will, but I didn't want to start off on the wrong foot. This guy is nice otherwise and seems trustworthy, very chatty and open to socializing, and frankly, I was just happy I could finally get in and drop my stuff. The second red flag is when he tells me I will be living in a small flat adjacent to the bigger house he lives in, but I shouldn't worry because I would have my own place, own bathroom, own kitchen, etc. I didn't like that too much, but I actually think it might be good because I am not super comfortable being on my own in a ground floor accommodation, knowing anyone can get into the yard and access the front door. I guess you could say I'm paranoid. So knowing that someone I quote-unquote know is close by in case something happens gives me a sense of safety. But I was wrong. He shows me around. It all seems okay. It's pretty old, but as I said, I wasn't looking for a luxury stay. The part where I would stay is on a lower level than street level. Not exactly like a basement because there is access to a garden, but I need to walk down a set of stairs outside and get into the flat through the backyard. This shows mostly when I'm in the bedroom, as I see through the windows that it's clearly at a lower level. Next red or rather yellow flag is when he shows me a door close to the bedroom, which is the connecting door between my part and his house. I was kind of expecting that, but thought he might need to at least cross the yard or access through the front door to get into my part of the house. He says his door stays closed and it's locked anyway. Not as a warning for me, not to try to open it, but more like, you'll notice there is the door. It's useless for you. And what's beyond it is not part of what you're renting. We chat a little bit. Too long for my taste, because I was tired and also still annoyed at his lateness, and I wasn't in the mood to socialize. He gives me his phone number because he said the Airbnb chat feature isn't that good, and that it's easier to use WhatsApp, and then he leaves. I start to settle down, open my suitcase, and get changed before leaving to visit the family. I then go back to the place in the evening and decide to have a shower. If I remember correctly, what I'm saying next happened before I took a shower, because I remember locking the bathroom door, which I never do when I know I'm on my own, and I recall being quite anxious when taking the shower. So the biggest red flag before the last drop. I'm sitting on the bed and I hear a knock and someone saying my name. 2 seconds later, before I get the chance to answer, or even understand where the noise comes from, I hear keys turning in a lock and a door opening. As you might have guessed, it's the connecting door next to the bedroom. The guy enters and says he can't find his phone and that he might have left it downstairs. I'm a bit shocked, probably because if he had come 10 minutes later, I would have probably been naked, ready to take a shower or maybe walking around in a towel, since I'm supposedly alone. I know it might sound like I'm just being a pussy, but keep in mind I'm a relatively young woman, alone in a house with a man in his 40s or 50s, who has control over when he can get into my place at any time. I stay polite and try to tell him that no, I haven't seen his phone. I would have noticed, there's literally nothing except my open suitcase on a couch in the bedroom. He still gets in, speaking a lot, and it's very fast while I'm sitting there, not fully realizing what's happening and not having a chance to tell him to leave. He looks around the flat and obviously doesn't find the phone. Then he says sorry and probably asks if everything is fine. if I had dinner or something like that, and then he leaves again. At that point, I'm really wondering if I should stay or not, since I know you get refunded only if you cancel 2 nights in advance. I just thought I would lose the money for the night that has already started, because it was already after 11 p.m. And the following one, knowing I had booked at least 4 nights. I really needed to take a shower, but questioning if I should, I tried to see if there were available hotel rooms. But it was already too late to book one, or they were already fully booked. I decided to take my shower real quick, wondering if he could hear the shower and deciding that he forgot something else to get in again. Nothing bad happens. I then go back to the bedroom, get dressed as fast as I can just in case, sit down and think. I decide that I will just stay for the night, and I'll probably be less paranoid in the morning if I'm still alive. That's when I notice the chairs in the bedroom. There are 2, and one of them has ropes tied around the armrests. The chairs are in good shape, and the rope is definitely not there to keep the armrests fixed to the chair, as they are just loose. To this day, I have no idea why they were there. I still decide I should sleep there for the night, and try to use a chair to block the door handle in the bedroom, like in the movies. But guys, this only works in the movies. I try with both chairs, trying to pile them up. Even trying to use the ropes one way or another, the handle can still go down enough to open the door easily. I think that at least if I leave them in front of the door, I'll hear if someone tries to open it. But the door opens the other way, and in any case, I didn't know what I'd do even if the noise woke me up. Again, I'm clearly paranoid and anxious, but living alone abroad, my motto is to never ever take risks for my own safety, as I'm usually the only one who can save myself, so it's better to avoid any tricky situation. Doesn't mean I never go out, but I wouldn't get drunk around people I don't trust, and I would take a cab if I feel unsafe going home on my own after midnight. I now live in a city that's rather safe, but has had too many bad encounters. Unfortunately, nothing unusual for most women, not to be careful. So from an external point of view, this is a story about someone booking an Airbnb with good reviews, with a nice and friendly landlord who is just overly open because he likes to meet people, and the ropes are just a detail. But for my anxious and paranoid self, it's the premise for a horror story or thriller, where you shout out the stupid and trusting victim to get away ASAP before the guy comes back. So I decided to call my brother, who came to pick me up around midnight, for me to spend the rest of my stay at his place. I work in food service, front of house, so in the early days of the pandemic, with the restaurants being closed, I was taking work wherever I could find it. An old friend clued me into a medical office that needed someone to come in and do a bit of light filing. I was able to go in at night to limit direct contact with people. So I jumped at the opportunity right away. Ironically, the medical office job had been the safest that I had been offered thus far, COVID-wise. I wanted to avoid the bus if I could, due to crowds, so I decided to swing for a rideshare app. I headed in at almost 3 a.m. because it was after the cleaning crew had left. I was kicking myself for being so cautious though, because I was exhausted. I stumbled onto the block looking for my ride, and to my tired self's great relief, the car spotted me almost immediately and pulled up asking, "Uber?" While I cluelessly wandered up and down the street searching. The ride was taking a while, but I'd only just moved here last year, so I'm not familiar with all the surrounding areas, and I thought nothing of it. I was pretty alert at first, so I was trying to pass the time by playing games on my phone and stuff. But the car didn't have a compatible phone charger, and I wasn't sure the building would have one, so I wanted to save my battery to be able to call a ride back. I shut my phone down into airplane mode and eventually drifted off from a combination of tiredness and boredom. I don't often take rideshares, so being alone with a strange driver often put me a bit on edge, but this guy had a pretty boring car and a very standard look about him. He looked a little like my brother even. Young, clean-kept, listening to jazz. Nothing that screamed, you know. You need to micromanage this trip. When we arrived, the driver tried to wake me up by calling to me from the front, but I was in too deep of a sleep and I couldn't fully distinguish it from my dream. Finally, he awkwardly jimmied my leg to wake me up and kept saying, Ma'am, we're here now." I was embarrassed that I'd been that out of it, so I just gave a hurried thanks. I booked it out of the car and into the building. As I looked around, I began to realize nothing was what I had expected of an office park. I had seen a street view of the building when I first looked up the business, and it had appeared to be a strip mall plaza. The further I went, the more loudly alarm bells were ringing in my gut. The structure was semi-dilapidated, and it was pitch black dark past the entryway. I expected some lights to be off in the nighttime, but not the whole building. I skittered across the concrete foundation, compromising what was left of the lobby area. I told myself they must be renovating, and I followed signs for the stairs. After what felt like ages, but was probably just a few minutes, all I had passed was construction equipment, a couple of locked doors, and some smashed windows. I was certain I was not going to find a medical office, and figured maybe I had mixed up the address. I took out my phone to double check, but once I got it out of airplane mode, I could barely get a signal. I kept moving around in the building, pacing, looking for a stronger signal. I eventually confirmed in my text that I had written down the correct address just by scrolling back, which didn't require service. Since I had only been inside for a few minutes at most, I figured I should try and get in touch with the driver, because if I enter the correct address, then it was only fair he should continue my ride to the correct place and save me the added fees of calling a second trip, considering this was all his mix-up. The app was taking forever to load with my slow service, but before I could get to a cloud of reception, I heard a rustling sound in the lower level of the building. I was on the top floor, and the only stairwell I was aware of was the one I had taken up, so it would force me into the middle of the building. There was no way to exit the situation without encountering whoever was downstairs. In an abandoned building in the latest hours of the night, I figured the chances were high that it was just a tweaker, and I had no desire to try slipping past a tweaker, especially when it was late enough that they were probably on something. I tried to get a text out to a group of friends with my address and a request to call 911 to help me get from the property, because I didn't feel safe walking in that neighborhood at night, and I didn't have enough reception to call a new ride, but the message wasn't sending. Reception was too weak. So I gave up on getting my phone going, and I started checking for another stairwell, or even a window with balconies, or dumpsters that could be used to exit the second floor as a last resort, in the event whoever was downstairs came upstairs. I scrambled over to a door with a stair sign on it, but the stairs were completely dilapidated, and it was essentially just a straight drop down to the first floor. At that point, the worst case scenario began to unfold. I heard whoever was downstairs begin making their way up the stairs. I thought fast and figured based on my walkabout that the floor was basically a giant loop, so I'd have to wait for whoever this was to come up the stairs, wait for them to come all the way up, and then sprint the opposite direction of where they were going, and try to get down the stairs and out of the building in time to make it to the road without encountering them. I was not anticipating being chased or anything, but I didn't want to piss off a druggie or have a homeless person who might be living there feel as though I trespassed and become hostile towards me, or even have any sort of interaction that could possibly occur at that hour in an abandoned industrial park. I held my breath for what felt like 5 minutes, but was likely closer to just 30 seconds, and the person appeared at the top of the stairs. To my great relief, it was just the Uber driver. I figured he had come back for me, realizing he had left me in the wrong spot, a place that could have worked out to be dangerous. So I came out from the beam I was hidden behind, and I started to wave him down. But then I processed. There was no way for him to realize this had been the wrong address. My stomach lurched forward, and my blood chilled to slush. I made eye contact with him very briefly, and he was completely calm and composed, but breathing pretty heavily and blocking the stairwell down. On a normal, rational day, as an outside observer, I could think of a dozen innocent reasons he must have returned. But in that moment, standing across from him, I just knew in my gut that this was someone with ill intent. I can't remember much more from the ensuing few minutes, operating solely on muscle memory and instinct. I Superman dove for the second stairwell's opening and just let myself fall down the drop. Thankfully, I don't think he'd seen where I'd gone at first, and though I was in too much pain to know it then, plenty was bruised, but nothing was completely broken. I scrambled up and threw myself at anything that seemed like it could be the door. It was too dark to tell. I was disorientated from the fall, and I wasn't in a calm enough mindset to think to use my phone flashlight. Plus, in hindsight, some part of me probably knew it would call too much attention to my location. Just before I was able to reach the door, it flew open with a blinding light beaming straight into my eyes. My first thought, though not totally coherent, was, "There's another one of these guys. Ugh." And I stumbled backward, trying to find something to hide behind. Before I could, a voice called out, "Alright, this is the police department. Everyone get on your knees with your hands in the air." I didn't believe it was the police at first. I was in such a fight or flight mode, and I had already committed to flight that I continued looking for ways to get out. But he kept shining the flashlight right at me as I teetered around and yelled, "Hey, I sat on the ground, right now. Hands out." Hands out where I can see them. He sounded so authoritative that I just automatically did exactly as he asked. He approached me and finally shined the light away from me. It took a second to get my night vision, but once I did, I could see that he was actually a police officer. I tried to explain what was happening, but first he started asking me all these questions, and that, combined with what had just happened and my fear of the driver coming back, all snowballed into me being unable to form a single articulate sentence. He was even asking easy questions like, "Can you tell me your name? Do you have any knives, needles, or anything that could poke me? Would you rather talk in here or outside?" And my total stunned babbling in response at first led him to believe I was on something. He directed me out to his car, and once I was safely out of the building, I was able to start getting my bearings just a little. I sat on the edge of the back seat of the squad car, with the door open facing out, while he stood across from me and asked the same questions again. The first thing I could think of was, "Did my friends call you? What did they tell you?" And he explained no, nobody called him. He was patrolling the area and noticed a car idling outside of this building that's known to be condemned. And nobody's supposed to be inside, and when they are, they're not up to no good. He was launching into a speech about how if I'd gone to shoot up or meet a John, he had resources he could direct me to, and this was not an ideal place to do either of those things, and asking if I had somewhere safe to stay that night. But I was stuck on something else he'd said. Finally it all clicked. The car. I spilled my whole rideshare story into a frantic word vomit. He looked around and the car wasn't there anymore. The officer guessed the guy had driven off while we were talking inside the building. He asked me all the details I remembered and I told him, but there weren't many. I'd been too tired when the ride started to track much, but the other officer realized I could pull up my Uber app and I could get all the information. There wasn't really enough reception in there, even outdoors, so we sped down the road, and once I had enough bars, the app roared to life, and I had 4 missed notifications from Uber. They said, "Hello, I've arrived, and I don't see you. Can you confirm the pickup address is correct? And I am flashing my hazards." And finally, "Unfortunately, your driver had to cancel." At first, I thought the driver was so cunning as to pick me up while sending these fake messages and canceling so the GPS wouldn't track us, knowing I wouldn't notice because I was asleep with my phone off. But instead, I checked the car details, checked again, and it was definitely not the same driver. The person who driven me there had not been my Uber. My driver was somewhere else on the street when this guy pulled up to me. The policeman took my statement and said they would keep an eye out for the guy, but the best I could give them to go off was basically young-looking Caucasian man with brown hair, sideburns, goatee, and 4-door sedan, wearing a zip-up sweatshirt. Maybe he had a hood, which is like 1 out of every 4 guys in the city. I feel so blessed to have survived this near miss. Suffice to say, I do not take rideshare services anymore. Quadruple check your license plate and driver's name. You just never know. About 2 weeks ago, I booked an Airbnb in another country. I was going there for a concert. The room was cheap, so I knew I wasn't going to stay in a 5-star hotel, but it was only for 1 night, so I didn't mind as long as I had a bed. To start off, it already wasn't a great trip because my data roaming apparently didn't work in that country at all. I logged into a cafe Wi-Fi and planned my route in advance as best as I could. Managed to be at the house in time, rang the only bell and waited. Nobody came out. I repeatedly rang it and waited for 5 minutes. I noticed the door had a slot for mail and looked through it. I was shocked to see an entrance that looked like an abandoned barn. A super dusty couch right in front of the door, pieces of furniture covered in cloth, very dirty and extremely old. I usually love old houses, but that just didn't look like a house that was in use or prepared for guests at all. I wondered if I was at the wrong house and what to do now, as a super old, unwashed looking guy walked towards the door from the street. I asked him if he knew where the Airbnb was. He mumbled something, which I interpreted as positive. So I asked him if he was Tim, my host. He said yes and opened the door for me. Well, I already described the entrance. The centerpiece was definitely the super old, creaky staircase that led to the upper part of the house. I followed him upstairs. He was heaving and coughing and stinking of cigarettes, which wasn't exactly pleasant, but alright. The second floor was also abandoned looking, super dark with clustered furniture hung with cloth and randomly thrown together, and a super creepy curtain that I couldn't catch a glimpse behind. Another stair up, and we're in my hallway, which was honestly the worst one. Cracks in the walls, old rule paintings, and crosses hung up next to them. It seriously looked like the set of a horror movie. I usually don't have a problem with decor like that. I'm kind of goth, so anything darkly inclined is my jam, but everything looked so badly taken care of that I got major creepo vibes from this house. He showed me the bathroom, which had a huge hole missing in the bathtub tiling and the wall. Everything looked super dirty. He showed me to my bedroom, which was honestly okay. There were just a lot of creepy dolls on the shelves that threw me off, but the bed seemed fine. I asked him if they had Wi-Fi, and he said no, which really sucked. I really hoped they would have, because that meant I would have no way to communicate in there. I also asked him when checkout was the next day. He then said, "It doesn't matter." He then dragged himself up to the 4th story, which was in complete pitch black darkness, by the way, so that gave me very weird vibes. I definitely didn't want to get into the shower, so I just quickly changed and charged my phone. When I went to the bathroom, I realized I didn't even notice the creepiest part. There were no locks at all. Not for the bathroom and not for my room. I also noticed that there were so many half-used items that someone who looked like the guest before me had left there, like shower gels, toothbrushes, and toothpaste. A random lash curler just lay abandoned on the shelf. Not like a "here you go, for your use in case you forgot yours" way, but it just looked like someone left it and nobody bothered to clean it. I already made my mind up that I would definitely not stay the night in this house. My mind was just spinning scenarios. What if all these products were left by the people before me? And why did nobody leave horrendous reviews? I was super spooked. I seriously debated if I should take all my shit to the concert, because it didn't feel safe in the slightest. But my back was really hurting from my heavy backpack, so I just took my essentials and left the room as soon as I could. Not without sliding a folded paper under the door, so I'd see if someone tried to open it in my absence. When I was coming down the staircase, I heard someone turning a key in the front door. I was a bit confused, but in the advert, it said that a couple lived there, so I expected to see the wife or girlfriend of the guy I'd already met. Instead, a middle-aged man enters and says, "Hey, I'm Tim." All I could think of, then, who the fuck is the other guy? I was shitting myself inside, but I had brief small talk with him, and finally left the house. I was shook. Luckily I made it in time to the venue, and the concert was worth it. Afterwards, I was so tired that I knew I couldn't stay awake for the whole night, so I checked into a hostel. That was also not perfectly clean, but at least they had Wi-Fi, a proper shower, and a door that had a lock. The next day I got thrown out at 10 AM, so I made my way to get the rest of my stuff. I don't know why, but I checked the mail slot again and jumped back. The old guy was just snoring on the couch directly in front of the entrance door. I tried my best not to wake him up and snuck into my room to get my stuff. The door hadn't been opened, thankfully, and I finally left this godforsaken place. I don't know if I overreacted, but honestly, from the 2 Tims to the missing locks and a checkout that didn't matter, if I assumed the worst, this would have been the perfect setup to assault or murder someone. In the best case scenario, nothing would have happened, but I probably would have had panic attacks all night. Usually I love solo traveling, but this was just too much.